He divorced her in front of 50 witnesses, called her defective, broken goods, said it loud enough that the entire dining room at Montgomery's heard, loud enough that his mother Diane stopped mid-bite, fork frozen halfway to her mouth, green beans suspended in the air like evidence, loud enough that the waiter paused with a wine bottle hovering over the table, uncertain whether to pour or flee. Daniel Cross sat across from Seraphine Hartwell at table 14, the one near the window where everyone who mattered in Savannah could see them, and he delivered his verdict with the same tone he used to discuss quarterly earnings or parking violations. "She can't give me children," he said, not to her but to the room. "What's the point of keeping her?" Seraphine did not cry. She had learned 6 years ago that crying in front of Daniel only made things worse. She sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, back straight, the way he had trained her. She noticed things instead. The way his phone vibrated against the white tablecloth, the way he glanced at it, saw an unknown caller and silenced it with a quick stab of his thumb, the slight tension in his jaw that meant he was nervous about something that had nothing to do with her. She noticed everything. It was the only skill her marriage had given her. 6 months later, Seraphine stood in her studio apartment above the laundromat on Bull Street with $9 in her bank account and a hole in her left shoe that let in every puddle on the Savannah sidewalk. The apartment smelled like other people's fabric softener. The walls were thin enough that she could hear Mr. Patterson coughing 3 doors down and the couple below arguing about money every Thursday night. The mattress sagged in the middle. The bathroom faucet dripped no matter how tight she twisted it. But it was hers. No one could take it from her. October in Savannah refused to acknowledge that autumn existed anywhere else in the country. The humidity sat thick and wet against her skin. Walking through it felt like pushing through warm water. Her blouse stuck to her spine by the time she reached the end of her block. She walked 12 blocks to the public library every morning, 12 blocks back every afternoon, 24 blocks total because bus fare cost $1.75 and she needed that $1.75 for the difference between eating twice or eating once. The hole in her left shoe had started small, a separation of sole from leather right at the ball of her foot. The kind of failure that happens when you walk 24 blocks a day for 6 months because staying still means thinking, and thinking means remembering. The library had a corkboard near the bathrooms, community notices, garage sales, guitar lessons, missing cats. And in the bottom right corner, a 3x5 index card with handwriting so precise it looked like it had been produced on a typewriter from 1970. Administrative assistant needed. Discretion required. Unusual hours. No experience necessary. A phone number, 10 digits. Local area code. Seraphine called that night. It rang twice. "You got a gap in your employment history." The voice was rough. Decades of cigarettes turned vocal cords into gravel. "I was married," Seraphine said. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. "You start Monday. Don't be late. And don't ask questions about the files marked with the red seal." The line went dead. That had been 6 months ago. 24 weeks of filing autopsy reports in a basement office that was always exactly 64 degrees. 24 weeks of transcribing pathologist notes in a windowless room that smelled like formaldehyde and government-issued floor cleaner. The Chatham County Medical Examiner's office occupied the basement level of the federal building on Montgomery Street. Ruth Monroe ran the office. 62 years old, chain smoker, 40-year veteran of Savannah's death industry. She had a voice like a gravel driveway and eyes that noticed everything despite pretending they didn't. "You reorganized the filing system," Ruth had said 3 weeks into Seraphine's employment. Seraphine had frozen. "The alphanumeric code wasn't cross-referencing properly. I added a tertiary identifier." Ruth had looked at her then, really looked. "Your ex-husband was an idiot," Ruth said. But the Red Seal files were different. They started appearing in Seraphine's second week, not in the regular filing queue. These arrived directly on her desk always when she wasn't looking. Thicker folders, heavier paper, sealed with actual wax dark crimson. The cases inside described deaths that didn't make sense. Bodies drained of blood without wounds large enough to account for the loss. Toxicology results showing compounds that didn't exist in any pharmaceutical database. Corpses with marks on their throats, 2 punctures symmetrical precise. Seraphine filed them where Ruth told her to file them. In a locked cabinet that required a key Ruth had given her in the 3rd week. A small brass key that Seraphine wore on a chain around her neck tucked under her blouse. She did not ask questions, but she noticed everything. The red seal cases came in clusters. 3 in 1 week, then nothing for 2 weeks, then 5 in 3 days. The compounds in the toxicology reports were always the same. An unknown protein molecular structure the lab couldn't identify. The marks on the throats were always symmetrical. And the temperature in the basement corridor dropped approximately 4 degrees exactly 6 minutes before Ruth would appear and say, "Someone's coming. Go home early." Seraphine never saw who was coming. She always left before they arrived. Until week 24. Seraphine had stayed late to finish transcriptions. Ruth had already gone home smoking her evening menthol on the way out. The building was quiet, the kind of aggressive silence that government buildings develop after hours. 7:45 in the evening. Seraphine's fingers moved across the keyboard. 53-year-old male, cause of death exsanguination. No wounds consistent with blood loss observed. She saved the file, stood, gathered the stack of red seal folders that needed to go into the locked cabinet. The temperature dropped 4 degrees in 6 seconds. 6 minutes early her brain supplied. She should have left. But she was holding 6 red seal folders, and the locked cabinet was at the end of the corridor. These were evidence that someone wanted preserved. She walked. The fluorescent lights flickered once, steadied. She turned the corner. He was standing at the end of the corridor, not approaching, simply there, as if he had materialized out of the institutional beige and fluorescent hum. Seraphine's first thought was not that he was handsome. Her first thought was that he was wrong. Too still, too composed, like a photograph inserted into reality that didn't quite match the lighting. Tall, broad through the shoulders, dark hair, charcoal suit with no tie, and the eyes dark gray with a cold silver rim around the iris. Like storm clouds backlit by the moon. Those eyes were already on her when she turned the corner. The folders nearly slipped from Seraphine's arms. She caught them, clutched them to her chest, did the thing her body wanted to do least, and her brain knew she needed to do most. She stood still. "You must be the new hire," he said. His voice was quiet, controlled, the voice of someone who had learned that speaking softly forced people to lean in. "Seraphine Hartwell," she said, "administrative assistant, and you are in a restricted corridor after business hours without a visitor badge." The corner of his mouth moved, not a smile, a reaction to something unexpected. "My name is Thaddeus Ashford," he said. "I fund this office." Seraphine blinked. "You fund the medical examiner's office?" "Certain operations within it." His gaze dropped to the chain around her neck where the key hung. "The ones you've been filing in the locked cabinet. You haven't asked a single question about those files in 6 months. That's either remarkable discipline or remarkable incuriosity. I was told not to ask questions. You were told not to ask questions about the red seal. You weren't told not to notice patterns." He took 1 step forward, the movement soundless. His shoes on the linoleum produced nothing. "You've noticed patterns, haven't you, Seraphine?" "I've noticed that the bodies in those files died in ways that don't match any pathology I've read about. I've noticed that the toxicology reports contain compounds that aren't in any database I can access. And I've noticed that someone is altering the final reports." She paused. "I've also noticed that this corridor drops about 4 degrees approximately 6 minutes before someone arrives. Except tonight you're 6 minutes early, which suggests either my observation was incomplete or the pattern changed." Both corners of his mouth moved this time. 6 minutes, he repeated. "You timed it." "I'm observant. My ex-husband trained me to be observant. He didn't mean to. He was training me to be afraid. Turns out the skill set is the same." Something shifted behind Thaddeus Ashford's eyes. Not pity. Recognition. He reached into his jacket and produced a card. Matte black. just a phone number embossed in dark ink. "When you're ready, call this number." He turned to leave. Stopped. "One more thing. The man who drives past your building at 2 in the morning, the one in the silver sedan, he's been photographing your windows for the last 9 days. I've had someone watching him. He is not a threat I will allow to reach you, but you should know that he's escalating." The corridor was empty by the time Seraphine's heart started beating again. Daniel. On the 3rd day after the corridor encounter, she found a sealed envelope on her desk. Inside was a photograph, taken from a high angle, a silver sedan parked across from her building. The timestamp read 2:17 a.m. Through the windshield illuminated by his phone, she could see Daniel's face. On the back of the photograph in handwriting she didn't recognize were 4 words, "He hired a locksmith." Seraphine picked up her phone, took the black card from her desk drawer, called the number. It rang twice. "Seraphine," Thaddeus Ashford's voice. "He hired a locksmith," she said. "I know. That's why I left the photograph." He paused. "If you want to handle this through human channels, police report upgraded locks, I'll make sure the evidence reaches the right desk. If you want something more comprehensive, come to me." What does comprehensive mean? It means I tell you what I am, what this office really does, why your blood pressure drops 3 points every time you walk past the locked cabinet. And it means I explain why a man like Daniel Cross, who should be a nuisance and nothing more, has recently been in contact with people who make him look like a parking violation. When? Tonight. Ruth will give you the address. Ruth knows. Ruth knows everything. She has for 31 years. Who do you think wrote that job listing? He hung up. Seraphine walked to Ruth's office, knocked, and said, "I need the address." Ruth didn't look up from her paperwork. She slid a folded piece of paper across the desk. "Took you long enough," Ruth said. "Wear comfortable shoes, honey. It's a walk." The townhouse on East Jones Street had wrought iron balconies and windows that had been watching the street since before the Civil War. Nothing suggested anything other than old money and quiet taste. Just a dark green door with a brass knocker shaped like a closed fist. Seraphine knocked. A woman opened immediately, red hair pulled back in a severe bun, 30s maybe, military posture. "Miss Hartwell, I'm Vivian. Follow me." The interior was warm, hardwood floors, bookshelves, lamps with warm bulbs, the smell of real coffee. Thaddeus Ashford sat in a leather armchair with a glass of something dark red. He stood when she entered. "Sit, please." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Coffee. Coffee." Vivian returned with a cup. Perfect temperature. Perfect cream ratio. "You said you'd tell me what you are," Seraphine said. Thaddeus set down his glass, leaned forward. "I'm going to tell you a word. Notice your own reaction. Not what you think it should be, what it actually is." "Okay." "Vampire." No spike of fear, no surge of adrenaline. Instead, something settled, like a puzzle piece dropping into an empty space. The temperature drops, the soundless movement, the drained bodies, the red seal. Ruth keeping secrets for 31 years. "Okay," Seraphine said. Thaddeus waited. "I've been filing exsanguinated bodies for 6 months," Seraphine continued. "You don't breathe unless you're talking. Your skin doesn't change temperature. Ruth put me in this job on purpose." She took a sip of coffee. "The question isn't whether I believe you. The question is why you're telling me." Something raw surfaced behind Thaddeus's eyes, almost young, as if centuries hadn't quite extinguished the capacity for surprise. "Because you're in danger," he said, "and because it's my fault." Seraphine set down her coffee. "Explain." Thaddeus stood, walked to the window, spoke to the glass. 43 years ago, I let a human woman get close to me, a forensic pathologist named Dr. Margot Hartwell. The room went very quiet. She worked in the same office where you work now. She was brilliant. The first human in decades who figured out what the Red Seal cases were. He paused. "Your mother's name is Catherine." Catherine Hartwell née Robinson. Margot was your grandmother. Seraphine's hands were steady around her coffee cup, but the inside of her chest felt like it was being disassembled. My grandmother died when I was 4. My mother said she had a heart attack. Your grandmother died because I failed to protect her. Thaddeus turned from the window. She discovered a rogue faction feeding on humans indiscriminately. She confronted me, demanded I act. I told her to stay out of it, that it was vampire business, that I would handle it. His jaw tightened. She didn't stay out. She gathered evidence, documented kills, identified rogues. She was going to go public not about vampires, but about the pattern of deaths, the cover-ups. The rogues found out before I could stop them. He met her eyes. They made her death look like a heart attack. It wasn't. And I've spent 43 years making sure it could never happen again. The job listing was mine. The Red Seal system was mine. Ruth was mine. He paused. When your application came in, Ruth recognized your last name, called me. I put you in that job because the rogue faction that killed your grandmother is active again. More active than they've been in decades. And 3 weeks ago they identified you. Seraphine stood, crossed to the window. My grandmother's research, she said. She called it the ledger, a compiled record. Evidence, testimony, forensic analysis, genetic profiles, 40 years of rogue vampire activity, names, locations, feeding patterns, financial networks. Thaddeus moved beside her. She hid it. The night before she planned to deliver it to me, someone in my inner circle betrayed her location. She never told me who. Just left a message saying the ledger was safe, that only her blood could find it. He looked at Seraphine. I've been waiting 43 years. So has Ruth, and so have the rogues. Daniel. Daniel is being used. They approached him, fed him resources, legal connections. He thinks he found wealthy backers. What he actually found is a faction that needs him to keep you destabilized, monitored, and eventually accessible. What do you want from me? I want to protect you. I owe your family that. That's guilt, not a plan. The plan is for you to help me find your grandmother's research before the rogues do, to dismantle the faction that killed her and neutralize the threat to you. Seraphine turned to face him. I have conditions. You don't make decisions for me, not about my safety, not about anything. You give me information and I decide. I spent 6 years with a man who thought he knew what was best. I'm done with that model. Agreed. What else? You tell me everything, not what you think I can handle. Everything. The moment you filter to protect me, we're done. Your grandmother said something similar. I didn't listen to her either. I'll do better this time. Seraphine extended her hand. A handshake, not an embrace. A negotiation. Thaddeus took it, his grip firm, his skin cool. And when their hands met, Seraphine felt a current. Not electric, more like touching a wire carrying information. A transmission she couldn't decode. Thaddeus felt it too. His fingers tightened before he let go. 2 weeks of research followed. Ruth briefed her during lunch breaks, told her things about Margot, that her grandmother had been brilliant and fearless. She set up the Red Seal system, Ruth said. Before her anomalous cases just disappeared. Margot preserved the evidence even when no one was ready to act. The person who betrayed her, Seraphine said. Do you know who? Ruth's expression changed, a tightening around the eyes. She told me the night before she died. Showed up at my apartment at 4 in the morning. Said the ledger was safe, that only her blood could find it. That the person who sold her location was someone Thaddeus trusted absolutely. Someone who believed they were protecting him by strengthening his position through intelligence from the trafficking network. Ruth lit a cigarette. She said the betrayal came from love, which made it worse. Seraphine spent evenings at the library, combing public records, building a timeline of her grandmother's life in Savannah during the early 80s. She found the address on the third night, 27 Whitaker Street. Records showed Margot had lived there from 1980 to 1983. The current owner was Dr. Arthur Clemens, 71, retired historian. Seraphine knocked on a Saturday afternoon with a story ready. My grandmother lived here in the early 80s, she said. She passed when I was small. I'm trying to reconnect with her memory. I'd love to see the garden if that's all right. Dr. Clemens' face softened. Margot Hartwell. The previous owners told me about her. Brilliant woman. And the jasmine out back, I've never been able to kill it. Most resilient plant I've ever seen. Come in. Take all the time you need. The garden was small, enclosed by brick. The jasmine dominated the south side. In afternoon light, its white flowers seemed to glow. The smell was thick. Seraphine stood at the trellis base, closed her eyes. The jasmine knows. She pressed her palm against the wall beneath the vine. Nothing. She moved lower, to the soil line where roots disappeared. Her fingers pushed into dirt, felt along the wall base. There. A brick slightly recessed. She pushed, felt it give. Click. The brick beneath shifted, revealing a narrow gap. Seraphine reached in. Her fingers found metal. A box. Small, wrapped in waterproof material. She pulled it out. The wrapping was oilskin, still intact after 4 decades. Inside was a tin box. Inside the tin, a leather journal, a USB drive in a sealed bag, and a folded letter. Seraphine opened the letter. Her grandmother's handwriting, angular, precise. If you are reading this, you are my blood. The journal contains what I could not trust to any machine. The drive contains what I could not trust to paper. Together they are the ledger. Everything I found, every name, every kill, every trail of money and influence that the rogue faction has used to operate inside Thaddeus Ashford's territory for 40 years. But the most dangerous thing in this box is not the evidence against the rogues, it is the evidence of who helped them. Thaddeus's court has a fracture. The person who sold my location to the rogues the night I died was someone he trusted absolutely. I could not prove it in time. The proof is in the ledger. Use it carefully. And if Thaddeus Ashford is standing next to you when you read this, which knowing him he probably is, tell him 3 things. 1, I forgive him. 2, I told him so. 3, the person who betrayed me did it out of love for him, which makes it worse, not better. The person's name is Vivian Kane, his lieutenant for 170 years. Be careful, little one. The truth is heavy. But you come from women who carry heavy things. Margot. Seraphine read the letter once. Her hands shook. She read it again. Her hands steadied. By the 3rd paragraph she knew exactly what had to be done. She walked back through the house, thanked Dr. Clemens, got into the car where Thaddeus was waiting. She handed him the letter. He read it under the dome light. She watched his face. The composure held. And then on the 3rd paragraph it didn't. He turned his face away. His hand came up to press against his mouth. His shoulders moved once. A single convulsion swallowed before it could escape. They sat in the car on Whitaker Street for 11 minutes without speaking. Then Thaddeus started the engine. At the townhouse, Vivian was waiting. The coffee was fresh. The work of dismantling a 43-year-old conspiracy would begin. But first, the ledger needed analysis. A younger vampire named Theo cracked the USB encryption that night. The drive contained financial transactions spanning 14 decades, genetic profiles of 217 victims, audio recordings of transactions, security footage from 3 trafficking sites. Margot's journal filled page after page, dates, locations, names, victim profiles, forensic details. But more than that, bank transfers, shell companies, a network of money flowing through legitimate businesses, and woven throughout the name, Vivian Kane. The next morning a courier arrived with legal documents. Cross versus Hartwell. Motion to annul the divorce decree on grounds of mental incapacity and undue influence. Daniel's attorney. Expensive letterhead. The language painted a picture of an emotionally unstable woman who had made decisions under unnamed outside parties' influence. It was lies. The hearing was scheduled for 2 days from now. Seraphine set the documents on Thaddeus's dining table where the ledger was spread. Journal pages, printouts, a 43-year map of corruption. "He's escalating," she said. Thaddeus read the motion. His jaw tightened. He's being pushed. The rogues know we have the ledger. They're using Daniel to destabilize you, to distract me, to buy time. Will it work? Not even slightly. Thaddeus set down the motion. But we're going to give them what they think they want. We're going to let Daniel think he's winning, then take everything from him in the most public way possible. What are you planning? Tomorrow night, the Savannah Memorial Hospital Charity Gala. Daniel will be there. He's on the board. He'll have his new fiancée with him, a woman named Charlotte, 24, trust fund, a woman who will vanish the moment scandal touches her. Thaddeus's eyes held something cold and precise. I'm going to walk into that gala in front of 200 of Savannah's elite and make very clear who you belong to, not because you're property, because you're protected, because I want Daniel to spend the next 2 days knowing exactly what's coming. You're going to claim me publicly. Only if you agree. This is your decision. I can destroy Daniel a dozen ways, but if you want the satisfaction of watching him lose everything in front of everyone who matters, you need to be there. Seraphine thought about the dining room at Montgomery's. 50 witnesses, the frozen waiter. He told everyone I was worthless. I want them to see how wrong he was. Thaddeus crossed the room, stopped in front of her. Then we'll make sure they know. All of them. That evening Thaddeus made a phone call. Seraphine heard him from the kitchen. Sienna, it's Thaddeus Ashford. I need you to take a case, tomorrow. Everything I'm sending will be on your desk in an hour. A pause. Full retainer, yes. The hearing is in 2 days. I need evidence folders ready by morning. The dress was emerald. It fit perfectly. Vivian had done something to Seraphine's hair, not styled into submission, just encouraged. You look like someone who belongs exactly where you're going, Vivian said. The Savannah Memorial Hospital Charity Gala filled the Dotto Hotel ballroom. 200 people, doctors, donors, board members, everyone performing the careful dance of Southern society. Daniel was easy to spot, near the bar with a woman who had to be Charlotte, young, blonde, laughing, completely unaware. Daniel saw Seraphine the moment she entered. His face did something complicated. Surprise recognition calculation. Seraphine held his gaze, didn't look away, just stood there and let him see that she existed, that she was here. Then Thaddeus walked in. The room shifted, a subtle redistribution of attention. Thaddeus wore black, a suit that cost more than rent. No tie. He crossed the ballroom like he owned it. He stopped in front of Seraphine. You look devastating, he said quietly. Then he turned to the room, raised his voice. Excuse me. I need everyone's attention. Conversation stuttered. People turned. The room found quiet. My name is Thaddeus Ashford. Some know me. Most don't. You're about to. He turned to Seraphine, held out his hand. She took it. This woman is Seraphine Hartwell. I want to make something very clear. She is under my protection, under my care. And she is, as of this moment, the single most important person in my territory. He looked directly at Daniel. Anyone who challenges that in court, in business, or any arena will answer to me personally. And I promise you that is not a conversation you want to have. The ballroom was silent. Seraphine felt every eye on her. Thaddeus's hand tightened, a reassurance. Carry on. Enjoy your evening. The noise returned, but everything had changed. People looked at her differently now, not with pity, with something closer to respect or caution. Daniel was still staring. His face had gone through expressions and landed on rage wrapped in disbelief. Charlotte was tugging his arm, saying something. Daniel ignored her. Thaddeus leaned close to Seraphine. Do you want to leave, or stay and watch him process this? Stay, definitely stay. They stayed an hour. Daniel tried to approach twice. Both times someone intercepted him. A board member, a waiter. Thaddeus's timing too perfect. When they left, Seraphine looked back once. Daniel stood in the doorway, alone. Charlotte had found someone else to talk to. He looked smaller than she remembered. "Let him watch," Thaddeus said quietly. "Let him see what he lost. Let him spend the next 2 days knowing that when that courtroom door opens, I'm going to be sitting behind you, and there's nothing he can do about it." The knock came at 5 in the morning. Seraphine had been staying at the townhouse for 3 days, ever since the gala, ever since Thaddeus had made clear she was not alone. She opened the door to find Vivian fully dressed, face pale. "They took him," Vivian said. "Who?" "Daniel. The rogues took Daniel 2 hours ago, from his home. Thaddeus got the alert and left. He told me to keep you here. Safe." Seraphine was already moving, already pulling on clothes. "The vampire court convenes at 4 this afternoon, the human court at 5. If Thaddeus does something that violates vampire law before the session, everything falls apart." "Drive me," Seraphine said. "He told me to keep you here. But he didn't order you not to drive me if I insisted." Vivian stared 3 seconds. Something shifted in her expression. "You sound like Margot." "Good." They drove through pre-dawn savannah, empty streets. The GPS led south toward the industrial district. The abandoned hospital sat at the edge. 5 stories of crumbling brick. A building scheduled for demolition 3 times, somehow surviving through bureaucratic delays. Vivian parked 2 blocks away. "If we go in, we're walking into a trap." They took Daniel to draw Thaddeus out, to force a confrontation before court. They're hoping he'll violate vampire law, give them grounds to challenge his authority. Then we don't let him violate vampire law. The interior smelled like rot and copper, old blood soaked into concrete. Seraphine followed voices up a stairwell, down a corridor. The voices came from what must have been an operating theater. Double doors, small windows. Seraphine looked through the glass. Thaddeus stood in the center, surrounded. 6 vampires in a loose circle. And sitting in a chair behind them, hands zip-tied, mouth bleeding, a split lip fresh, was Daniel. He looked diminished. The man who had controlled 6 years of her life reduced to a pawn. One vampire was speaking. A woman, tall, dark hair, calculated beauty. Seraphine couldn't hear through the door, but she could see Thaddeus's face, that terrible stillness, calculating kill time. She pushed open the door. Every head turned. The vampire closest to the door moved to intercept her. The dark-haired leader raised one hand, stopped him, her eyes calculating, weighing whether a human witness made this better or worse. Thaddeus's face showed terror, not for himself, for her. "Seraphine, get out." "No, I'm not leaving. And you're not doing anything that violates vampire law, because that's exactly what they want." She looked at Daniel, at the blood on his lip, the fear in his eyes. Did you know they were vampires when you agreed to help?" Daniel's face was answer. He had known. "You knew. Helped anyway because you wanted me back. Not love, you couldn't stand the idea I'd left, that I chose being alone over being with you." She turned to the dark-haired vampire, pulled the folded letter from her jacket. "You made a mistake. You assumed Thaddeus was the only threat. But my grandmother didn't hide the ledger in a place only her blood could access because she thought I'd need a vampire to protect me. She did it because she knew I'd be smart enough to use it. This ledger contains 43 years of evidence. Evidence the court will listen to. Evidence that doesn't need Thaddeus's testimony. Evidence naming every one of you. Your financial networks, your feeding patterns, your kills." She checked her phone. "In 11 hours, the Court of the Southern Reach convenes. Thaddeus doesn't need to touch you to destroy you. He presents evidence, and I'm the one presenting it." She looked at Thaddeus. "You told me my grandmother made you understand what it felt like to be truly known. To have someone see not the vampire king but the person underneath, trying to do better than the century before." She held his gaze. "I see that person, Thaddeus. And that person doesn't break vampire law. That person doesn't give them the satisfaction of watching him fall. That person walks out, leaves Daniel to his choices, and lets the court do what it was designed to do." The room was silent. Thaddeus's eyes held hers, the war behind them, 400 years of isolation versus the desperate need to protect. Finally he nodded. Once. Sharp. "You heard her. We're leaving. Keep Daniel. He chose you. He can live with it." He walked to Seraphine, stopped beside her, looked down at Daniel. "I told you the danger you represented was a parking violation. I was wrong. You're not even that. You're a cautionary tale. What happens when you're too small to recognize something extraordinary?" He took Seraphine's hand. They walked out, Vivian following. Behind them, Daniel Cross sat with zip-tied hands and bleeding mouth, and the dawning understanding that he had lost. 12 hours after the hospital standoff at 4 in the afternoon, the court of the Southern Reach met in a building that looked like a decommissioned church on Broughton Street. Inside a circular chamber 3 stories underground, ringed with seats carved from dark stone, lit by fixtures producing light without visible flame. 47 vampires, the full membership, representatives from territories across the South. Seraphine sat in the gallery, the only human. Every eye found her when she entered. The dark-haired vampire from the hospital stood on the raised platform with 5 others, the rogues. They stood hands clasped behind backs, no restraints. The court itself was the bond. Thaddeus stood at the prosecutor's position, black suit, no tie, looking exactly like a king bringing charges. "The court recognizes Thaddeus Ashford, king of the Southern Reach," said an older vampire, gray-haired, highest seat. "State your charges." "Unauthorized feeding, human trafficking, murder conspiracy to undermine this court's authority. Evidence spanning 140 years, gathered by Dr. Margot Hartwell, a human pathologist who identified the kills and networks. Evidence hidden 43 years. Now recovered." He gestured to Seraphine. She stood, walked to the platform, carried the ledger. "This is the ledger. My grandmother compiled it between 1980 and 83. Documented kills, financial transfers, networks of vampires who enabled and profited from human trafficking." She set it down. "It also contains evidence the operation was funded and protected by someone in Thaddeus Ashford's inner circle, Vivian Kane, who served as his lieutenant 170 years before betraying him." A murmur ran through the chamber. The gray-haired vampire raised a hand. Silence. "Serious charges. Do you have proof beyond documentation, testimony?" "I have my grandmother's voice." Seraphine nodded to a control booth. A younger vampire pressed a button. Margot Hartwell's voice filled the chamber. "My name is Dr. Margot Hartwell, recording this October 12, 1983. If you are hearing this, I am dead, and the people responsible are listening to evidence they thought buried." The recording ran 20 minutes. Margot's voice, calm, clinical, laying out kills patterns, financial networks names, and the betrayal. "I was scheduled to meet Thaddeus Ashford tomorrow morning to deliver this evidence. But tonight someone called me, someone who knew about the meeting, told me to stay home, that Thaddeus would come to me instead." A pause. "I know what that means. I know who made that call. By tomorrow I'll be dead, and this will look like a heart attack, and no one will investigate because I'm just a human who worked too hard." Another pause. "But I'm leaving this because my granddaughter will find it, and she'll be smart enough to use it. I want the court to know that Vivian Kane sold my location to the rogues, protected this operation 170 years, believed she was serving Thaddeus by strengthening his position through intelligence from the trafficking network. She was wrong, and I genuinely hope that when she finally understands what she's done, it destroys her." The recording ended. Silence. Seraphine looked at the accused. "My grandmother believed in justice. That evidence mattered. That truth properly documented and presented would be enough. I'm here to prove she was right." The gray-haired vampire looked at Thaddeus. "What sentence do you request?" "Execution. For all 6. Death by sunlight exposure. Immediate." The word hung like smoke. "The court will deliberate." 11 minutes. When the court reconvened, the verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all charges. Sentence execution by sunlight dawn the following day. The 6 vampires were removed, silent, no protests. They had gambled and lost. As the chamber emptied, the current Vivian approached. She had been present for the entire session, listening to the recording, hearing the evidence. She stopped in front of Thaddeus and Seraphine. Her face showed strain, internal conflict. "I didn't know," she said, voice steady but tight. "I chose that name because I was told Vivian Kane was your most loyal servant, that she'd given everything. I wanted to honor that." She paused. Something worked behind her eyes. Grief, anger, betrayal of her own. "Now I know the truth, and I need time. Time to decide who I am without this name, what I want to carry forward and what I need to leave behind." She looked at Seraphine. "Your grandmother deserved better. You deserve better. I'm sorry it took her voice for me to understand the weight I was carrying." "What will you do?" Thaddeus asked quietly. "I don't know yet. But whatever name I choose next will be mine. Something that doesn't carry anyone else's sins. Something I earned, not inherited." She turned, walked away. The session adjourned at 4:45, 15 minutes to drive to Chatham County Courthouse. The human hearing began at 5. They made it with 3 minutes to spare. Seraphine sat at the respondent's table, her attorney Jessica beside her. Legal aid, competent, underpaid, outgunned. Daniel's attorney was Sterling. Expensive suit, practiced smile, $400 an hour. Daniel sat beside him, the split lip scabbed over but still swollen, still visible, dressed in his best suit, playing wronged husband. The hearing was supposed to be formality, but formality weaponizes when one side has money. Judge Patricia Morrison entered. Everyone stood. She took her seat. Sterling opened with practiced confidence, painting emotional compromise, unnamed outside influences, hidden assets, lies. But they sounded good. Jessica did her best. Documentation, photographs, messages, financial records showing Daniel's controlling behavior. But Judge Morrison was looking at Daniel clean-cut, calm, and then at Seraphine in a department store dress, working a job barely paying rent. The scales were tilting. Then the back door opened. Thaddeus Ashford walked in. Black suit, soundless grace. Behind him a woman, blonde, mid-40s, leather portfolio. They took seats in the gallery, Thaddeus directly behind Seraphine. Close enough the temperature dropped 2 degrees. Judge Morrison paused. Sterling stopped writing. Daniel's face showed panic wrapped in recognition. The blonde woman stood. "Your Honor, my name is Sienna Vale. Mr. Ashford retained me this week to review the respondent's case. I represent interests allied with Miss Hartwell. I'd like to submit additional documentation." Judge Morrison frowned. Counsel was not on the filing. "Entering as amicus curiae, Your Honor. Documentation pertains to the petitioner's conduct during and after marriage. Financial connections directly relevant to this motion." Before Sterling could object, Sienna opened her portfolio. Documents, phone records, financial transfers, surveillance photographs showing Daniel meeting individuals connected to organizations under federal investigation, shell companies recently flagged by the FBI for money laundering. Private investigator reports showing Daniel had paid for illegal entry into Seraphine's apartment, illegal surveillance, illegal harassment violating the existing restraining order in 14 instances. Judge Morrison reviewed. Sterling reviewed. Daniel's face went through expressions: confusion, anger, denial, then fear when he looked across the courtroom and saw Thaddeus looking back. Thaddeus's gaze was steady. He looked at Daniel the way you look at a solved problem you have no interest in revisiting. Then Thaddeus leaned forward, close enough Seraphine could feel his breath. He spoke. Not loud, just loud enough for Daniel to hear. "Let him watch what he lost." Judge Morrison looked up. "Mr. Sterling, does your client have an explanation for these records?" Sterling looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at Thaddeus. Thaddeus looked back with patient eternity. "Your Honor, Daniel started. I'm not asking you, Mr. Cross, I'm asking your attorney. Sterling cleared his throat. Your Honor, without time to review. The documents are detailed, Mr. Sterling. They show harassment, surveillance, conspiracy to commit felonies. They suggest your client has been in contact with individuals involved in ongoing federal investigations. She set down the documents. I am denying the motion for annulment. Denied with prejudice. Mr. Cross cannot refile. Furthermore, I am modifying the existing restraining order to make it permanent. Mr. Cross is not to contact, approach, or communicate with Miss Hartwell in any way. Violation results in immediate arrest. She looked at Daniel. I'm also recommending the district attorney review these records. What you've done goes beyond contentious divorce. It enters stalking and criminal harassment. You should consider yourself fortunate Miss Hartwell hasn't pressed charges. Yet. Gavel down. We are adjourned. Daniel sat frozen, his attorney already packing, already calculating distance from a publicly exposed criminal. Charlotte had called off the engagement that morning. The moment Daniel's name appeared in connection with federal investigations, she vanished. Thaddeus stood, offered his hand to Seraphine. She took it. They walked out together. Behind them, Daniel Cross sat at the table with ruins and dawning understanding. He had lost everything. Not just Seraphine, his reputation, his standing, potentially his freedom, all because he had been too small to recognize what he had. Outside, reporters waited. Miss Hartwell, comment on the decision. Are you pressing charges? Who is your companion? Seraphine stopped, faced cameras. My ex-husband spent 6 years convincing me I had no value. He told everyone I was worthless, served no purpose. Pause. Today a judge ruled he was in violation. Not me. Today the court recognized what he never could, that his accusations were lies, that the only thing broken was his judgment. Another pause. I'm here to tell every woman watching who's been told she's not enough, you are not what they say. You are what you choose to be. You have more power than they want you to know. She looked at the camera. Daniel Cross tried to erase me. Instead, he lost himself. That's what happens when you mistake control for love. When you confuse possession with partnership, you end up alone, and you deserve it. In the days that followed, the rogue vampires were executed at dawn. The trafficking operation dismantled. Federal investigators opened cases on the shell companies Daniel's wealthy backers that had been funneling money for decades. Daniel was arrested 2 weeks later. Charges of stalking, harassment, conspiracy. His trial would begin in 6 months. Charlotte married someone else within the year, someone who didn't come with federal investigations. The current Vivian took 3 months before choosing a new name. She became Elena Thorne, a name that meant nothing to anyone, a name she could fill with her own meaning. 6 months later, Seraphine stood in front of a lecture hall. The course was Vampire-Human Relations, an elective, funded anonymously. Everyone suspected Thaddeus, but no one could prove it. 20 students, notebooks open, waiting. My name is Seraphine Hartwell, she said. 6 months ago, my ex-husband publicly stated I had no value. Today I'm going to tell you about the 400-year-old vampire king who proved him wrong, about my grandmother who spent 3 years building a case against monsters because she believed truth was worth dying for, about what I learned when I found her research and used it to dismantle a trafficking operation running over a century. She paused. But first, the most important lesson, the one that matters more than anything else. Students leaned forward. You are not what other people say you are. You are not their labels, not their limitations, not their failure of imagination. You are exactly what you choose to be. And if someone tries to tell you otherwise, you gather evidence. You build a case. And you prove them wrong so thoroughly they spend the rest of their lives wondering how they were ever stupid enough to underestimate you. In the back row, Thaddeus Ashford sat with a slight smile, watching the woman he'd failed to protect 43 years ago get her justice through her granddaughter, watching the woman he'd waited 400 years to find understand her own power, watching Seraphine Hartwell transform from victim to survivor to victor to teacher, knowing the story was not over. It was only beginning. Outside the lecture hall, Ruth stood with a file in her hands. Not Red Seal, not yet. But the pattern was familiar. Bodies in Atlanta. Drained. Same compound. Same marks. She would show Seraphine after class. Because the work continued. Because the world had more monsters than anyone wanted to admit. But it also had Seraphine Hartwell. And Ruth thought that was exactly the kind of balance Margot had been hoping for. The kind of balance that didn't just preserve evidence. It created justice. And justice once created had a way of spreading. Like jasmine. Resilient. Impossible to kill. Growing in places no one expected. Covering walls that had stood for centuries. Making something beautiful out of old brick and hidden spaces.